Time now for Q&A, so yes, please.
I'd like to introduce concepts that were hinted at here but not entirely addressed directly, and that's education. The reason being is that the examples that we dealt with in the primary papers all come toward the end of the guide, which has generally been considered a situation in which Maimonides wants to educate the philosopher for social responsibility. That being said, I'd like to just source for the cursing of a deaf person. Source for it. That requires a situation that's not stated here, but I think has to be part of it. If and it depends on what level you want to read the text, because it either if there are only two people in the room, one of them deaf and one of them a cursor, then of course the deaf person doesn't know they've cursed. Only the cursor knows that they've cursed, and presumably the only witness is God. And so it could be that that's the understanding of that text, that even in situations where no harm is done because the situation reduces to an example of one, you're not to do, because that's not a good quality in you as a philosopher, legislator. The other possibility, though, is to introduce something that especially Levinas has taught us as a philosopher, and that's that the ethics may require a third. And the third here is that we have to question, is there any implication that there is a witness? Because really the cursing of another person, even if the person were not deaf, because if the person's not deaf, then they heard your curse, and then we have a he said, she said, or things of this sort, which is not easily prosecutable in court. But if there's a third, that already establishes the ethical situation in which you have a witness. There's a witness. So so that's a point I'd like you to address, because all your examples come from the end of the guide.
Okay, first of all, thank you for all the comments. I think in advance I wanted to prevent the damage. How did I do that? I have a handout and much more sources that I spoke about, because we had 20 minutes of a book of 300 pages. And many of the comments we actually agree, and we actually wrote in other places, especially Shaikil's. Most of what you said, and all the resources you mentioned are explicitly mentioned. Nevertheless, we do think that when we look in contemporary Torah, Ilchot Nizkei Mamon v'Ilchot Mezik, that's the basis of Ilchot Nizkei Mamon. And in those fields, the religious aspects is not as strong as there are in Ilchot Chovel, Ilchot Rotzeach, Ilchot and other aspects. I want to deal now, and I thank so much Professor Weimar. I want to deal with what he said here. I would like, and we started when we read Maimonides, that Maimonides would be a corrective justice scholar, although this is innovation itself. And you're right, said nobody spoke about that, and I think at least we agree that he's corresponding with these issues. But when we're talking about the Calabrese aspects, none of the sources that you brought are the sources that we are using to show that. There are other sources that indicate that quite precisely. I want to start, and maybe in a few minutes, maybe we could read together to see the difference. Actually, it's a very interesting. Calabresi did the same thing on the opposite. Everything is discussed avoider. It makes, but I see all of this in Maimonides. That's why we need a guide to the perplexed. We see all of these notions. It's very interesting. So you started with Hilchotnis Kei Mamon, and you say, actually, we bring that that he has a notion of corrective justice. I agree with that. Yeah, that this is the principle. Whenever a person pays for damage that he caused, source number 3 in his handouts, it is considered monetary obligation. Whenever he pays more or less, double payment for theft or half the amount is greater than less. But for God's sake, according to Maimonides, this is part of tort law. These fines, theft, and what you call punitive damages, you isolated Maimonides only to the very limited sphere of corrective justice without dealing with how, from his point of view, this is part of tort law. This is part of tort law. You have both. You do have this corrective justice, but you do have these kind of fines. And let's see punitive damages. Why is it sort of punitive damages? Because unlike criminal sanctions, it's paid to the damaged party. Now let's see. Okay, I'll just let's just read the way Maimonides in the guide explains the double and 4 and 5 payments given by the Ganav. And according to him, it's part of tort law. Let's see the last page. It is right that the more frequent transgressions and sins are, the greater the probability of their being committed, the more severe must be the punishment be, in order to deter people from committing them. But sins which are of rare occurrence require a less severe punishment, for this is the reason that who stole a sheep, you can see before that how actually he deters in terms of optimal deterrence. He has 4 actually conditions. Only the first is the severity of the crime. He's talking about the frequency of the crime, the amount of temptation, the facility with which the act may run secretly, the chances that you'll be caught. This is very close to the multiplier approach. And it's very hard, maybe, I don't know, to read all these texts in a corrective justice. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm asking, you're an expert, how can you read these kinds of texts in this way of analysis? The same thing when we're talking about the guide. I'm sure he meant 2 objectives, not only 1. But nevertheless, he says, after he's talking about prevention of damages, he says to provide great incentive to prevent damage, a man is held liable for all damage caused for his property as a result of his actions, so that the man will pay attention and guard no fault. We have to provide great incentive to avoid damages, as we write in the, sometimes it's more close to strict liability. It's very, very, from my point of view, I would like it to be more, because it's classical that Maimonides will be more close to corrective justice, more close only to religious aspects, but I do find, especially in the third part of the guide, these ideas that are more social in terms. He's talking about welfare, he's talking about deterrence. I'm not sure, only in that way. I think it's a more broader, it's more consequentialist point of view. And why is it in the third part of the guide? Look, this is one of what we said, people don't read enough this part. It's very important for legal scholars. Hanina ben Menachem, they edited a book about the Yosher and whatever, but the rationals that Maimonides provide there for the legal parts are very important. So most philosophers deal with the guide. Most legalists deal with the code. I think we should pay much more attention to this third part of the guide, and we can find a lot of treasures there.
Okay, now time for another person.
Just a very minor point that when you translate the source 4 from the guide, section 3, chapter 40, you say the idea behind returning lost items is clear. It provides utilitarian returns, measure for measure. And I think in light of Professor Weinrib's suggestion that maybe the utilitarian model doesn't apply in the early period, I think that this doesn't come out of the Arabic either. It does talk about manfa'a, which does mean benefit, and you could translate that as utility, or maybe or benefit, but I think that's pushing it too far to use the term utilitarian.
Okay, but isn't the substance utilitarian?
It is referring to benefit.
He's actually, it's very interesting. This is a good example that he's dealing what I called with both aspects. He says, Ashavat Aveda, it's important. Okay, it's a good manner for the society, and you have, I call it the utilitarian consequence. It's a very important because we're looking if you'll respect your father when you're old, he'll respect you. So this is a very consequentialist idea. Very, and he's playing with both of them. That's what I brought this source to show you, that Maimonides explained in both ways. It's not only in one way. There are both. He's interested in these both and these two parts of Tikkun HaGuf. Yeah, I agree with. But the substance I think is utilitarian.
I guess that Professor Ledzer will have a comment about the Islamic roots of Maimonides.
Yes, just a very short point here. When I read the source 8, and the source 8 about the function of the, this is it, word by word, was written by Islamic legal scholar, of course, a little bit even after Maimonides, but I guess it's Ibn Taymiyyah, in its book of public order, public domain, I forgot the name in Arabic, but if you compare it to Maimonides, you can see that Maimonides in this regard is not at all original. He followed exactly Ibn Taymiyyah or no. Ibn Taymiyyah was after him in 100 years, but Ibn Taymiyyah himself followed, Muslims that preceded Maimonides. You can take it as a. So anyway, the component of comparative study here is horizontal or vertical is missing in your.
Okay, it was worth coming to Toronto. We're neighbors in Jerusalem to hear that. To hear that, I asked you once on that chapter. I'm very, very happy to find. But you say he's after Maimonides.
You translate the Taymiyyah and you see Maimonides.
Last comment.
Okay, so as to the injunction issue raised by Professor Weinrib, so in order for him to argue that corrective justice also deal with prospective issues, not only with retrospective issues, so we argue that slaughtering the animal, which did not make any damage yet, cannot be regarded as pure and classical corrective justice. Why? Because if it was an injunction in modern eyes, I would say that the court would give an injunction for the owner of the animal to prevent the animal from entering the field, if not some sanction. The slaughtering of an animal before anything else practical, I hardly see it as corrective justice. And it is not to say that corrective justice doesn't deal with prospective issues. It is, and every legal system has the preventative measures of injunction and so on. But I think that this source is one of the sources that we can see that is not pure corrective justice. This is one example. The other example is, of course, the prohibition against the prohibition to cause damage and liability for what we call in modern eyes future harms. In the words of Ariel Porat and Alex Schein, for whoever knows the articles and other articles on this issue, future harms, liability for future harms or prohibition to cause damage, which is another version of the thing. We think also that this is not a classic corrective justice. This is not the correlativity that you point to. So we think that the preventative prospect concept of Maimonides is maybe different from the classical corrective justice.
Okay, thank you very much.